What's the worst accident that happened at your workplace? Not my story, but my dad told me it. A man got his arm stuck in a machine, which degloved his arm. After he recovered, he was showing the safety people how it happened, and he accidentally degloved his other arm. Death by asphyxiation when he walked into a pure nitrogen environment without the PPE that was hanging on the door and had to be moved to open. Along with disabling all the safety measures, there were many, and didn't notify the required spotter. To this day I still wonder if it was planned suicide. That almost happened to me once when I was in college and worked for the chemistry department. I needed to get some liquid nitrogen and went in the room where it is stored. I noticed there was a sheet of ice on the floor and mist rising up. I then felt myself starting to lose consciousness and made a mad dash to the hallway before I collapsed on the floor. Luckily I recovered a few minutes later and realized some dumb graduate student didn't close the valve all the way on the liquid N2 tank. In industry we would call an instruction like, close the valve, dummy, an administrative control. Lethal hazards cannot be mitigated by administrative controls alone. You must have fixed guarding or some sort of safety control system, which is automated, redundant, and rated for the task. The reason is that you cannot just rely on people to be compliant. Blame and name-calling doesn't help. You need additional hazard mitigations to reduce the probability of injury or death from occurring. Universities can be super dangerous for industrial hazards. Probably because what each lab is doing might drastically change year to year. The people turn over rapidly by definition, and not a lot of workplace experience or standardized training. At a company I was working at, 2 guys working in a low point, heavier than air gas leak, 2 guys pass out. The spotter then climbs down to figure out what was going on. 2 more guys come along, and climb down to figure out what was going on. 5 guys asphyxiated. When I was in flight school for the Marine Corps, we did a high-altitude chamber exercise intended to demonstrate what hypoxia was like. The chamber pumped out the air until it simulated 15k feet or so. We were all given tasks. Patty cake, draw circles, etc. I was given the task of adding by 7. I wish I would have kept the paper. I think I got to 56 or 63 before the text became unreadable. Scary stuff. Working at McDonald's, a girl slipped walking past a deep fryer and her hand went deep into the fryer. The manager wrapped her hand in a cloth. When she pulled it off to put in water, all of her skin came off. We were still made to work, so we walked off. They were even happy to keep using the fryer after it. I worked at McDonald's too, and the exact same thing happened with one of my coworkers. He never came back to work, and I heard he lost several fingers to the burns. If you receive any kind of burn, do not wrap it in anything. You need to cool the area with water for at least 10 minutes, but the longer, the better. If it's a fryer, call an ambulance. Worked for a nursing home that's right near the local fairgrounds. They brought a bunch of wheelchair-bound residents up on a small embankment overlooking the approach to the fairgrounds to watch the opening day parade. One guy's wheelchair didn't get locked and he went over backwards. Fell 20 feet, broke his neck and shattered his skull. Therapist I worked with hung himself in between clients on a Friday. That count? I had left early for the day, but 3 coworkers had to get his body down after another one had found him after he hadn't taken his appointment back to the office. I had talked to him just before it happened and he seemed down. But he had a lot of personal issues hit him all at once. Apparently his wife had served him divorce papers the night before. We were both trauma therapists. I had to help his clients process what happened. I've heard it's somewhat common. When I was a kid, my therapist killed himself, and right before, he had written prescriptions for all his patients so their meds wouldn't be disrupted or something. A former teacher of mine did that on the last day of school inside his classroom, and 2 of his students found him. He was also sending a message to the education department. He was a very popular and well-liked teacher by other teachers and students alike. Working for a specialized trucking company, a fellow driver lost control fully loaded going down a winding mountain road. The truck tipped over, slid across 2 lanes of oncoming traffic and landed in a field. Truck and trailer were absolutely demolished, Cab was flattened, and the driver, a huge guy, crawled out the back window without a scratch. 400K unit wasn't even recognizable. Guy was fired when insurance pulled the ECM out of the rig and found he was going over 100 km per hour around a 50 km per hour corner and didn't even touch the brakes. Man fell 75 feet due to standing on the wrong side of the pipe he was cutting. You ever see those cartoons where they cut the branch while standing on the branch? He was cutting from inside and everyone thinks he just got disoriented. Man crushed in a 40 megaton stamping press. Man fell into a scrap metal grinder. Take your pick. Edit. It seems I'm wrong. It's a 40 kiloton press. Thank you for all of the corrections. Edit. Edit. I have more if you like. OSHA needs to set up a permanent office in that workplace. Guy fell in a molten vat of steel and obviously died due to a guardrail that broke off that the company was previously warned about by OSHA as being unsafe. OSHA fined them only $148K. I worked somewhere that a guy jumped into a vat. There wasn't much recovered. I have a cousin-in-law who is a lineman. He was telling me a story over Thanksgiving how he fell from 30 to 40 feet a couple years back and just shook it off. And how almost every linesman he knows has fallen from 20 plus feet at least once. Downright terrifying. Guy fell 15 feet and landed on his head. He lived, it fixed his lazy eye, and he's still with the company. He became very irritable, has violent outbursts and is a little psychotic but otherwise perfectly okay. Imagine having your lazy eye fixed by being essentially dropped on your head. Reset. Friend of mine was leaving his store late one evening when a car swerved onto the pavement and mowed him down in a hit and run. He had severe head trauma and it was touch and go for a while, but after extensive surgery and a few weeks in a coma, he woke up. Well, I saw he woke up, the body woke up, and he has all my friend's memories, but he's a completely different person now. He was the nicest guy you ever met, very laid back, been with his wife since they were kids and had 5 kids who he utterly adored, and they were his everything. The person that woke up is a very angry man, short-tempered, unaffectionate. He says he remembers how he used to feel about his wife and kids, but he has no feelings for them now. He hasn't got feelings for anyone anymore. He literally doesn't care about anyone. Something similar happened to my best friend's brother. He was in a serious car accident at 19. Almost died. Brain damage and all that. Complete personality change. Became a huge butthole. My best friend said her brother died that day. Frontal lobe damage can do this. It essentially handles things like impulse control and empathy. Had a cornstarch dust explosion at a previous job, and no, it's not previous because I caused it, lol. A truly stupid guy decided he'd sneak a cigarette break in basically the worst place he could. He came very close to death for his stupidity and could have taken others with him, but thankfully he was the only one seriously injured when the dust went boom. Pretty sure he made himself disabled for life. That night I was pretty far from the boom area doing vacuum decay testing on completed bags of sugar substitute. I was uninjured, but it definitely scared the crap out of me. Didn't know cornstarch was so dangerous. I didn't either until that job. During training they even did a demonstration showing how explosive ignited starch dust was, and this dude still decided to be stupid. There have been some far worse starch explosions that actually killed people and leveled big portions of the building it happened in. The worst one I think ever happened killed like 45 workers. Pretty much any fine powder is flour, coffee creamer, wheat dust, sawdust, etc. Dust mitigation and explosion proofing should be a big deal when working with these materials. Collapsed scaffolding. 19 dead, over 40 injured. Scaffolding death at my plant. Dude was helping put up a new building and didn't hook up to the bars and fell 40 feet. Another dude tripped and went face first into a steel plate on the ground. Died 3 days later in the hospital. Thing was, both guys were new hires. Downed firefighter trapped in a fire, never got out. A good buddy of mine is a firefighter. The first big, this is my job, moment he had was being the first on site for a 4th of July accident. Don't give children fireworks if you wish for them to have hands tomorrow. My dad's a doctor, and he said one time this older teen had half his face blasted by a firework when he looked down the tube wondering why it hadn't gone off. Worst I've seen was a whole hand gone. Not just fingers, I don't know what they had, but basically half of the palm of hand had gone. Teenage girl cut off her finger after refusing to wear the cut-proof glove because it was ugly. My cousin had a roofing company and a guy wasn't using his safety tether while on a roof. He fell off and ended up falling into a hole that had been dug so they could work on some electrical wiring. He was electrocuted and died on the way to the hospital. Follow safety protocols, folks. Had a grandfather who was a steel worker. He saw a handful of people over the years fall into Bell. They'd slip and then they'd be gone. Not just dead, gone. Nothing to clean up, nothing to send home. Nothing left at all, just some steam. I work in the lumber industry. We have machines called hogs that are basically giant motors that spin hammers around, which pulverizes wood waste into sawdust, which is collected in chip bins and then gets hauled off for use in paper or particle board manufacturing or whatever. I've heard several stories of guys who fall and get knocked out in waste conveyors, and as you can imagine, there's nothing left but some stained wood dust when they come out the other side. Everybody has seen Fargo. Imagine that, but far more powerful on an industrial scale. I was guessing that they probably scooped off the slag or debris that was left on the surface. If it was molten iron, though, like they said, the carbon in your body that is left over would most likely become part of the metal and increase its carbon content. You are right, though, most likely there are a bunch of structures around the world made up of a past human. That reminds me of the Great Wall of China and how there are skeletal remains inside, left over from deaths during construction possibly, which are actually ingrained in the material. Great point though, thanks for bringing up that idea, lol. Maintenance tech at the fiberglass place I worked at fell into a pool of molten glass because he didn't want to shut the plant down to fix the feeder motor. Didn't see it, as I was on break. Dude was driving a reach fork truck. He was retracting the mast, while at the same time driving off into the next hall. The truck was faster than the mast, which didn't clear the doorway. The truck flipped over and threw him out, as he wasn't wearing his seatbelt. The mast came down and cut him clean in half. When I worked at a grocery store, a guy lost his thumb in the meat slicer. Worst part is, because of the blade, it went flying and they couldn't find it soon enough to reattach. Deli was closed for 24 hours. We had a guy killed by being blown up in a gas explosion at a house. We had 2 employees on a construction site killed by a gunman who then killed himself. We had a director who was driving to the airport for a business trip killed by a truck tire going through his car. Those are the worst ones I know about. When I worked at UPS, a truck fell off a lift and crushed a mechanic. Literally 10 minutes after I was talking to him about his upcoming family vacation. Thank you for listening.